Whenever I'm at a run club and people hear that I'm a coach, I get a lot of the same questions over and over. And many of these questions are about running form and technique. People are worried about their heel striking tendencies or their cadence is lower than they think it should be. Sometimes people want to know if they should switch to minimalist shoes so they can run more naturally. I'm using air quotes there. All of these well-meaning runners have clearly been down the same internet rabbit holes that so many of us have explored. These are all good questions coming from a genuine desire to improve, but they're also the kinds of questions that can lead runners into endless tinkering, second-guessing, and sometimes even injury, all in the pursuit of some perfect form that may not even exist. So today, we're going to tackle this head-on. We're going to separate the myths from the science when it comes to cadence, foot strike, and really running form in general. And more importantly, I'm going to help you figure out when making changes is actually worth your time and when you should just put on your shoes and run. Welcome to the VMAX Running Podcast, where the goal is to help you become a better runner than the one you were yesterday. I'm your host, Coach Brad, and today we're diving into a topic that has launched 100,000 internet arguments and probably caused just as many unnecessary injuries: running form. Specifically, we're talking about cadence, foot strike, and whether you actually need to change yours. Let's get right into it. We're living in a golden age of running data. Your watch can track your cadence, your vertical oscillation, your ground contact time. There are AI apps now that analyze your foot strike from slow motion video, and it's all too easy and accessible to compare your running metrics to elite athletes. And look, I'm not against data. Data absolutely has its place in training, and you should be adjusting your training to data that you're noticing about your performance. But here's what I've noticed. All of this information is creating a generation of runners who spend more mental energy worrying about how they run than they spend actually running. And the irony is that overthinking your form while you run can actually make your form worse. Let me explain what I mean. Running is absolutely a learned skill. Now, I think a lot of non-runners tend to think of running as just this innate behavior because we all do it in childhood. You learn how to walk, then you start running, you run with your friends on the playground, you're playing tag. It's a very natural movement pattern. But once you start running for sport and you're trying to improve your performance, you're trying to be more efficient, that's when you realize there are some intricacies that matter. Proper running form does make a difference, and the variation in efficiency between well-trained runners with good running economy and newer runners with poor running economy can be several percentage points, sometimes even more on an individual basis. That is significant. So yes, form matters. But here's what often gets lost in all the online debates about cadence and foot strike and all that stuff. Your body is remarkably good at organizing movement patterns over time, just through the act of running itself. Research has shown that experienced runners naturally move toward more efficient stride rates compared to novice runners. A 2014 study found that while no novice runners self-selected the most efficient stride rate, experienced runners got much closer to their optimal rate simply through accumulated miles and practice. The more you run, the more efficient you tend to become. Now, this doesn't mean you'll automatically achieve perfect form if you just log enough miles. But it does mean that constant tinkering with your mechanics, especially during your actual runs, isn't always the answer. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your form is to stop thinking about your form and just run. Here's my philosophy, and I share this perspective with many of the great running coaches who have come before me. The best running form for you is the one that keeps you healthy. A healthy runner who trains consistently will improve. A runner who's constantly sidelined by injuries, some of which may be from forced form changes, or who's so caught up in their head about hitting the right cadence that they can't enjoy a single mile, that runner's not going to make any progress. I know runners who used to be midfoot strikers. They were getting hurt constantly. They switched to heel striking. Yes, switched from midfoot striking to heel striking, and they've stayed healthy for years. Now, of course, I also know other runners who went in the opposite direction with great success. The point isn't that one approach is universally better. The point is finding what works for your body, your build, your individual running goals. All right, let's talk about the number that's probably caused more unnecessary anxiety than any other in recreational running, and that is 180 steps per minute. If you've spent any time researching running form online, you've probably come across the claim that your cadence should be around 180 steps per minute. We've seen this in running magazines, blog posts, YouTube videos, probably even in the notifications from your GPS watch. Where does this number come from? So at the 1984 Olympics, the legendary running coach Jack Daniels observed the stride rates of distance runners competing at the highest level. He found that virtually all of them had a cadence of 180 steps per minute or higher. This observation made its way into his book and then into other coaching resources and eventually became gospel. Your cadence should be 180. Here's the problem. Those were Olympic caliber athletes running at race pace in competition. Of course, elite runners at high speeds have fast leg turnover. That's part of what makes them fast. But cadence is directly tied to running speed. When you run faster, your cadence naturally increases. When you slow down, it naturally decreases. That's how running works. In fact, there are only two variables that determine how fast you run. Okay? I want you to think about what those are. What do you think it is? I love sharing this with people because it really does show how simple the activity of running actually is. So the two variables that determine how fast you run are the number of steps you're taking and the size of those steps. So in other words, your cadence and your stride length. So naturally, if you're running faster, you're going to have a higher cadence, especially if you're an elite athlete in competition, right? So a recreational runner on an easy training run, which should make up the majority of your training week, will naturally and appropriately have a lower cadence than an Olympian in the middle of a 10K race. It's not a problem to be fixed, okay? So please stop stressing about this number. Running coach Steve Magnus made a really good point about this. He said that if you run an 11-minute mile pace with a cadence of 180 steps per minute, your stride length would only be about 32 inches. That is a very short, choppy stride that would be incredibly inefficient and probably exhausting. The obsession with hitting a specific cadence number ignores the relationship between cadence and the speed you're actually running. Now, both stride rate and stride length exist on a bell curve. Too slow or too short is inefficient. Too fast or too long is also inefficient. You're most efficient somewhere in the middle. And where that middle is specifically depends on how fast you're running, your leg length, your fitness level, and your individual biomechanics. Here's what the research actually says about how runners run faster. Initial increases in speed rely more on lengthening your stride than increasing your turnover rate. But at higher speeds, when you're really pushing it, that flips. At that point, speed increases come more from faster leg turnover, while your stride length may actually decrease slightly. Your body naturally makes these adjustments as you change pace. So rather than obsessing over hitting 180 on every run, pay attention to whether you're overstriding, which I'll talk about in a minute. That's actually the more important issue. Let your cadence be a result of good mechanics and appropriate effort, not a target you're forcing yourself to hit. And by the way, if you want to see your cadence naturally increase, there's a simple solution. Run faster. Do some strides at the end of your easy runs. Include speed work in your training. As your fitness improves and you're capable of running at quicker paces, your cadence will come up naturally as part of that process. Now let's get into the really contentious stuff. Heel strike versus midfoot strike versus forefoot strike. If cadence debates are heated, foot strike debates are practically a holy war in some circles. So first, let me clarify what we're actually talking about here. There are three basic types of foot strike. With a heel strike, your heel contacts the ground first. With a midfoot strike, the ball of your foot and your heel contact the ground almost simultaneously. So the ball of your foot hits the ground first, and just a split second later, your heel also makes contact. And then with a forefoot strike, the ball of your foot hits first, with your heel barely touching or not touching at all. Forefoot striking is really only natural during sprinting or running up steep hills. You don't see a lot of runners who naturally run with a forefoot strike. So the debate tends to be between heel striking and midfoot striking. You've probably heard the claim that heel striking is like running with the brakes on. And I actually use this analogy with overstriding, but not necessarily with heel striking, because it's technically not the case. What is a little more accurate is when you heel strike, you kind of coast during the support phase before you can start driving forward again. So there's a brief moment where there's no forward propulsion happening, but at normal running speeds, the time you spend in this phase is so small that the actual effect on your pace is minimal. What the research does show is that biomechanically, a midfoot strike produces less impact force than a heel strike. Studies of half marathons have shown that a higher percentage of faster runners use a midfoot strike compared to slower runners. And faster runners also have shorter ground contact time. But here's where we need to be careful about drawing conclusions. Correlation isn't causation. Faster runners don't become fast because they midfoot strike. They tend toward midfoot striking because of the speeds they're running. As I mentioned earlier, the faster you run, the more your foot strike naturally moves forward. It's a consequence of speed, not a cause of it. This actually plays out in interesting ways during races. Studies of marathoners have found that many runners who start the race with a midfoot strike will transition to heel striking in those later miles as they start to fatigue and slow down. Their bodies are naturally adapting their gait to their changing pace and energy state. There was also a fascinating study out of George Washington University that challenged the idea that running barefoot automatically creates a midfoot strike. Researchers studied habitually barefoot runners from a population in northwest Kenya called the Dasanak. The assumption was that these lifelong barefoot runners would all be midfoot strikers, since that's supposedly the natural human gait. But the study found that most of them actually heel strike, even without shoes. Some switched to midfoot striking at faster speeds, but heel striking remained common. This contradicted the very popular belief that barefoot equals midfoot. So the question is, should you change your foot strike? My answer is probably not, unless you have a specific reason to. If you're a heel striker who's running injury-free with no recurring issues in your knees, your back, your hamstrings, you probably don't need to change anything. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But if you're dealing with chronic injuries in any of those areas and you suspect that your mechanics might be a factor, a gradual transition to a midfoot strike might be worth exploring, ideally with the help of a coach or a physical therapist. The key word there is gradual. Runners who force a quick transition to midfoot striking often trade one set of problems for another. Midfoot striking puts a lot more stress on your calf muscles and your Achilles tendon. And if those structures aren't prepared for the new loading pattern, you're going to end up with calf strains or Achilles issues. Most likely, change will not come quickly, easily, or without some degree of frustration. Your body's been walking and running with your current movement pattern for years or decades, and adaptation takes time. So if you do make a change, I definitely don't recommend doing it in the middle of a training block. If you've got a race on the calendar, leave it for later. Or, I mean, if you're getting injured and that's why you're making the change, maybe cancel that race and take some time to make that transition. But definitely don't do it in the midst of a hard training block. All right, so if chasing that 180 cadence number isn't the answer, and if switching your foot strike isn't usually necessary, what should you actually focus on when it comes to running form? What matters a lot more than whether you heel strike or midfoot strike is where your foot actually lands relative to your body. This is the single most important thing I want you to take away from this episode. Whether you're a heel striker or a midfoot striker, your foot should contact the ground directly under or only slightly ahead of your hips. When this happens, your tibia, your shin, is at or close to a 90-degree angle to the ground at the moment of contact. This allows forward propulsion to begin almost immediately because your foot is under your center of gravity and can push down and back right away. When your foot lands too far in front of your body, that's called overstriding. And overstriding is where the real problems happen, regardless of which part of your foot is hitting the ground first. When you overstride, you place significant eccentric stress on your hamstrings because your leg is elongated way out in front of you with each step. If your stride is really long, you can even hyperextend your knee. Overstriding also creates this dead spot in your gait cycle. When your foot is that far in front of your body, no forward propulsion can occur until your center of mass catches up to your foot. And in fact, the ground reaction force is actually pushing you upward and backward rather than forward. So this is where that braking effect actually happens. It's not about your heel hitting the ground. It's about your foot landing far in front of your body. Research has shown that landing on your heel significantly ahead of your body increases loading rates compared to landing with your leg closer to under you. And here's an important nuance. A heel strike that lands under your body is much less problematic than a heel strike that lands way out in front. It's the overstriding that causes most of the issues that people blame on heel striking itself. So if you're a heel striker, the goal should not be to force yourself onto your midfoot. The goal should be to shorten your stride in front of your body so your feet land under you or close to under you. This naturally increases your leg turnover a bit and reduces the loading forces on your joints. There's a simple cue that helps a lot with this. Run tall. When you focus on running tall, keeping your posture upright with your hips forward and your core engaged, your foot naturally lands closer to under your body, regardless of what part of your foot is touching down first. Running tall and just keeping that cue in your mind reduces overstriding without you having to think about the mechanics of each individual step. Another thing to keep in mind is where you're looking. And I mean, like, literally where your eyes are pointing. Your eyes cue your head position, which cues your upper body position, which affects everything else down that kinetic chain. Runners who look down tend to tilt their head downward, which causes their shoulders to roll forward, and it can lead to excessive spinal flexion. And then on the other hand, looking up or tilting your head backward can cause your lower back to arch, which actually encourages your feet to strike the ground farther in front of your body. Try to keep your gaze straight ahead, not at your feet, not at the sky. Pick a point out on the horizon and just focus on that. Now, after everything we've talked about today, I want to be clear that I'm not saying form doesn't matter or that you should never work on your form. I'm saying that obsessing over specific metrics like cadence numbers or forcing drastic changes to your foot strike, these things usually cause more problems than they solve. With that said, there are times when deliberate form work makes sense. If you're dealing with recurring injuries that may be biomechanically related, working with a coach or physical therapist to analyze your gait and make targeted changes can absolutely help. The key is that those changes should be based on an actual assessment of your individual mechanics, not on generic advice on the internet. If you have very obvious inefficiencies, things like excessive bouncing with each step, severe overstriding, or your arms swinging wildly across your body. Addressing those specific issues can make you a more efficient runner. And if you're in a situation where you're coming back from significant time off, you're essentially relearning movement patterns, and that is a great opportunity to clean up your mechanics. But here's the important part. Form work should happen deliberately during dedicated drill sessions or strides, not in the middle of your regular runs. When you're out on your easy run or your tempo workout, trying to consciously manipulate your mechanics is going to distract you from the actual purpose of that run, and it can make your movement feel really stiff and unnatural. Here's a good tip though. Running uphill is actually one of the best natural form teachers. When you run up a gradual hill, maybe a 2 to 5% grade, your body naturally adopts better mechanics. You'll get a slight forward lean from the ankles, your foot lands directly under your body, and you can't really overstride because the hill won't let you. Include some hill work in your training and you'll reinforce good movement patterns without really having to think about them. Strides can also be a great tool. Doing a handful of strides at the end of an easy run. These are short accelerations, maybe 20 to 30 seconds at a fast but controlled pace. And the idea is to help train your neuromuscular system at speed. When you're running fast during your strides, your cadence naturally increases and your foot strike naturally moves forward. You're practicing efficient patterns at speed, and over time, some of that is going to carry over into your regular training. The research supports this approach. One study found that simply running more, accumulating experience and miles, improved running economy without any intentional effort to do so. More experienced runners naturally move toward more efficient patterns. So while there is a place for deliberate form work, don't underestimate the power of just getting out there and running consistently. Okay, let me give you the practical summary of everything we've covered today. First, stop chasing that 180 cadence number. That number came from observing elite athletes running at high speeds. Your cadence will naturally vary based on your pace, and that's exactly how it should be. If you want a higher cadence, run faster sometimes. Strides and speed work will naturally bring your turnover up. Second, your foot strike is probably fine. Unless you're dealing with recurring injuries that might be related to your gait, a healthy heel striker doesn't need to become a midfoot striker. And if you do want to transition, do it gradually over months, not weeks, and pay special attention to strengthening your calves and your Achilles along the way. Third, focus on where your foot lands, not which part of your foot hits the ground first. Landing under your body with good posture is way more important than whether you're a heel striker or a midfoot striker. Run tall, keep your gaze forward out on the horizon, and let good posture guide all of the mechanics below. Fourth, let your form improve naturally through consistent running. Your body is smart. With accumulated miles and experience, you're going to move toward more efficient patterns. Trust the process here. And fifth, save the conscious form work for drills and strides. When you're doing your regular runs, run by feel. Don't try to think your way to better form while you're actually running. It needs to become automatic through practice, not forced through concentration. Here's a simple framework for deciding whether to work on something. Ask yourself, am I getting injured frequently? Is there an obvious inefficiency that I need to work on? Or am I just worried because this number on my watch doesn't quite match what I read online? If it's that last one, I have simple advice. Put the phone down and go for a run. The miles will do more for your form than any amount of internet research. That's our show for today. To recap, your running form will naturally improve as you gain experience and fitness. The 180 cadence rule is a misapplied observation from elite racing that doesn't translate to your easy training runs. Heel striking is not the enemy, and what matters most is that your foot lands under your body, you stay healthy, and you keep showing up consistently. If you're dealing with recurring injuries or you genuinely suspect there's a biomechanical issue holding you back, work with a qualified coach or physical therapist who can assess you individually. Generic form advice can only take you so far. Your body is unique, and your solutions should be unique too. With all of that said, I want to thank you for spending some time with me here on the VMAX Running Podcast. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen and provide feedback over the last couple of weeks. The response has been amazing. I appreciate your time and your attention, and I'm so grateful that you're allowing me to be a part of your running journey. Until next time, I'm Coach Brad. Keep showing up, keep putting in the work, and remember, the goal is always to become a better runner than the one you were yesterday. Thanks again for listening. Bye-bye.